breakfast.
Good morning, and welcome to the season finale of Comics for Breakfast. What's that? Yeah, I know. Say it's not so. Let me tell you, folks, everybody needs a little bit of time off, and I am certainly no exception. Since we started the show back in January, we've done 18 entire episodes. We've only missed 2 Sundays. That's like 74 old comics. Not bad. Not bad at all. But before I leave you for the summer, we're going to take one last trip to the archives. We're going to look at 3 books from a company that's very special to me personally. And that company is, of course, Atlas. No, not that one. The other one. You know, from the 70s. In a nutshell, Atlas Comics was a short-lived publishing attempt by former Marvel Comics publisher Martin Goodman to get back at his one-time company for perceived slights, most notably not installing his son Chip as publisher once Goodman was gone. The elder Goodman created Atlas Comics in the very image of his former company, going as far as to hire longtime Marvel staffers like Steve Ditko and Stan Lee's brother, Larry Lieber. However, in spite of offering high page rates and return of original art, Goodman was unable to catch lightning in a bottle again. That said, between the summer of 1974 and the end of 1975, Atlas produced some truly notable comics. If you want to know more, check out the video in the link at the description below. I talk all about it at length there. But for now, we're going to get into the comic books. We're going to begin with MORLOC number 1 from February of 1975.
And Hentai Mr. Hanky here? Why, he's the title character. Say what you will about Atlas, the company took some chances. In a lush greenhouse on the outskirts of a teeming city, an elderly gentleman tends to his plants. He's got the usual stuff: roses, ivy, and 2 oversized pods of mysterious vegetation. Before he can clue us in as to what's doing, someone bursts into the room and kills the botanist in a hail of gunfire. Hey, it's the Thought Police. In the 21st century, you can bet they're never far behind. Even the clearest lake has its share of slime. Remember that, Lieutenant. The botanist and his greenhouse are torched, and the pods are confiscated and taken to a top-secret government lab. Turns out the botanist was a college professor, dismissed from his position for teaching subversive subjects in the classroom. However, the professor continued his strange experiments after being dismissed, and now a previous student has gained control of his last creations. Only what the heck are they? If you said zucchini throw pillows, well, we've seen a lot of the same shows. One of the pods was damaged in the move, but the other grows in size quickly, and just like that, the miracle of life occurs. Now, I strive to make these videos as appropriate for the general audience as possible, but there are some things that I simply can't sugarcoat. So, without further ado, I present to you the plant Gina. Born a full-sized adult with silver hair, the scientist names him MORLOC. Wow, talk about setting your kid up for a life of failure. Even without its rich fictional context, that's a horrible name to burden someone with. But it gets better. MORLOC here has a green thumb, and he can't help but rub off on his fellows. Before you can say, "Oh, Geordie Verrill, you lunkhead," he's greened one of his captors, and because there's no gift that the state can't use against its citizens, it's decided to weaponize MORLOC. He's made into the world's most passive assassin, sent to kill poets on the street. Okay, maybe that's justified, but all in all, it's no kind of life for a young guy. He loses himself in a nearby park feeding the birds, and there he meets Linda, who is awful understanding and pretty besides. After a stroll and presumably a little sexy time in the woods with her, Morlock decides that he'd rather be a real boy than a walking can of Miracle Grow and goes to confront his bosses. Only surprise, Linda here isn't the sweet vegetable-loving gal she pretends to be, but is instead a big stinky spy sent to keep Morley here in line, and our title character does not go for that. Enraged by this betrayal and capsizing under the weight of all of this story's literary theft, Morlock undergoes a hideous transformation, metaphorically mirroring the story itself by turning into a big steaming pile of crap with tentacles. Morlock eats her and then takes off like Curly Stooge woo woo woo, running home slowly all the way back to the ashen remains of the professor's greenhouse. Having reverted back to his human form, Morley discovers a notebook that helpfully not only fills in the blanks on his origin, but comes with some anti-Morlock juice for whenever he wants to, tamp it down. And with that, we're off to the races. Morlock roams free, he's declared public enemy number 1, and somewhere, a second pod awaits.
So yeah, in my estimation, this is not one of the better Atlas titles, at least as far as quality goes. Oh, it's entertaining, all right, but maybe not for the reasons intended. The story's obvious hodgepodge of Orwell's 1984, Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and numerous other literary sources that my mouth is entirely too dry to mention are freely lifted, but without the original context, they feel hollow and bitter. For a book aimed at the young reader, there is precious little here in the way of thrills or excitement, but plenty of murky and morally nebulous action for the most diehard comics nihilist. Let's wash that bad taste out of our mouth right now by looking at Atlas Comics' sole humor title, Vicky. Now, Vicky here is an oddball choice, even for Atlas, but I guess Goodman figured he wanted to hedge his bets. Archie's been around for 25 years, you might as well rip that off, right? However, Atlas being Atlas, the actual story is a bit more layered, as Vicky here is reprints of Tower Comics' Tippy Teen from 10 years previous. Sure, the names have been changed and the clothing and hairstyles updated, but most of the time this just consists of color swaps and drawing unnatural growths of hair on the back of otherwise straight-looking characters' necks. Now, Atlas managed to squeeze 4 of these out, and they are not easy to find. In fact, I only have this issue number 1. More to the point, Hoyt, it's square-bound, so cramming this puppy into my scanner would really damage the book. Subsequently, we're going to look at scans of Tippy Teen in its place. Trust me, there's almost no difference. When there is, I'll point it out. Ooh, let's get to it.
A stretch in time sees Vicky and Tommy attending a basketball game. Vicky is smitten with Stretch Anderson, star player, but Tommy is less taken with the ginger giant. To Tommy's chagrin, Stretch asks Vicky out on a date, and man, does she go for it. There's no coy flirtation or gentle persuasion. Vicky practically jumps into this guy's lap. After all, Tommy's such a boy, and Stretch is a man, worthy of the laciest of underthings. Later that night, the big galoot picks her up in his jalopy, and off they go. But, to Vicky's surprise, dating Stretch turns out to be a bore. It's Dullsville, a total snorefest, with the basketball player unwilling to even throw a burger down her throat. After freezing out Stretch, Vicky goes back with Tommy. For all the kid's shortcomings, at least he's easily manipulated. Speaking of, we segue right into our next tale, Third Finger, Left Hand, which I thought sounded a bit like a Twilight Zone title, but I guess has something to do with marriage? Sucker Tommy gets cajoled by Vicky into going into a jewelry shop. The sleazy salesman archetype zeroes right in on Vicky, and amethyst-based shenanigans ensue. The ring gets stuck on Vicky's finger, Tommy has to pay for it, and the carousel of abuse continues. In spite of being blonde, Vicky is far more Veronica than Betty, and not above petty manipulation and passive aggression to get what she wants. The whole thing is meant to be funny, but it's pretty uncomfortable. Unlike the more or less wholesome Riverdale gang, these kids are intense and temperamental, leading one to wonder what kind of adults they're going to be in just a few years' time. As if to answer this criticism, the next story features a character so wholly terrible as to make our regular cast seem less so. Number one Sandy Duncan fan for life, Peg, is clearly after Tommy, but this kid is clueless. In spite of her treating him like a paper face mask after a day of grocery shopping at Walmart, he's still gaga over Vicky. But teen stupidity and hormones are essentially what make the world go round, so before you know it, we're caught up in a whirlwind of impulsive and questionable behavior the likes of which Pop's Malt Shop has never seen. Now, if this book looks familiar, well, there's a great reason for that, as most of the stories here were drawn by longtime Archie artist Sam Schwartz. Schwartz knows his way around a teen humor comic. When I was younger, I dismissed this style of art for its minimalism and stylized nature. It was easy compared to my favorite Marvel or DC artists, and it would be a few years before I understood the craftsmanship and technique that went into drawing such simple pictures. Schwartz is a master of nuance, with a lot of otherwise lame gags made funny through gesture and expression. In the hands of a lesser artist, this would be unreadable, but Schwartz manages to deliver a solid product in spite of a flimsy premise. Next up, we get the best story in the book, featuring Vicky's friend, Gogo. Unlike her acerbic pal, Gogo is a more or less sweet kid without any notable sociopathic tendencies. She's just a normal teen, happy to do chores and spin records like Stravinsky's Lullaby of Birdland while hanging around the house with her folks. The kick comes in the form of her learning-impaired boyfriend, Animal. I know, you think I'm making a joke at the expense of the slow-witted or the enfeebled here, but really, this guy is clearly meant to have some sort of mental handicap, which the writer plays for comedy. And he's not above throwing in a little good old-fashioned violence and abuse into the mix. Hey, it was the 1960s, folks. We won't see its like again anytime soon.
There's a lot more here, but you get the idea. Unlike the Archies, the Vicky universe is volatile and harsh. Stories end not with a joke or a little twist, but with characters bodily being thrown through windows or into trees. Unlike those freewheeling Riverdale teens, the gang of the Vickyverse here has to deal with the harsh consequences of their bad judgment, getting in deep with their parents and even the federal government. Vicky shows that, while imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, there ain't nothing like the real thing. Let's go out on a high note and finish today's breakfast with Target number 2 from July of 1975. Now, we covered Target number 1 way back in episode 3, so if you want to get caught up first, follow the link. I'll wait.
In A Crude Awakening, Target is doing a solo for the FBI, driving up the Alaskan pipeline, but he's expected. A well-timed explosion brings a mountaintop down on his head, but our hero swerves off of the road at the last moment and manages to survive. Lying stunned at the bottom of the hillside, Target's mind flashes back to the events of just a few days before. On a train from Chi-Town to the Big Apple, the G-Man runs afoul of gangsters Jack Dirt Franco and Sly Walker, who push him around a bit to make the point. Target won't be getting off of this train alive. But unlike other hard-boiled Atlas characters like Malone P.I. or Hot Dog Lovin' Cop Lomax, Target isn't the type to ask questions and produces a pair of hand cannons that would make Dirty Harry feel positively inadequate. Target dispatches the mobsters with the help of a passing train. In a state of shock, he heads back to FBI headquarters, where he's promptly fired by his boss, Carl. Carl! Target has become a liability to the agency, and he's being cut loose. Now, without the protection of his employer or his trusty guns, our hero truly becomes his namesake, a hunted man with nowhere to run. But where lesser men might give up, Target gets motivated. Why, he knows a guy with loads of weapons. Axes, cutlasses, maybe even some old guns. Anything is better than nothing. To his surprise, Boss Carl is there waiting for him. After a little small talk, we get right to it. Carl had to fire Target because of bad press, but instead of cutting him loose, the agency is reinstating him as an undercover agent. Even better, he's now armed to the teeth, as some unlucky gangsters will soon discover. What follows is the type of glorious mayhem rarely seen since the advent of the Comics Code. Nostrin goes all out here, delivering a truly cinematic sequence of events. His is a brutal ballet scored to a symphony of violence, with mobsters not merely mowed down, but eviscerated in a merciless stream of spun lead. Eat your heart out, Frank Castle. Flash forward to now, or at least the beginning of the issue. Target's assassins crawl out of the woodwork to admire their handiwork, but it takes more than a little TNT to hit the target. Now decked out in some sort of gimp biker gear, the G-Man dispatches the assassins, but not before extracting some valuable information. Meanwhile, fellow agent Jackie Brockett is already on the scene. She's captured by terrorists determined to blow up the pipeline, but Target is on hand to make the save. That said, this little lady ain't no shrinking violet, and she does plenty of damage herself. The head villain makes a successful escape, not getting away so much as blowing himself up in a self-inflicted explosion. With the plot thwarted, a grimly resolute Target is left to ponder his next move.
And that is target number 2. What a ride! Writer Rick Myers and artist Howard Nostrin deliver an exciting and at times wildly violent adventure with more teeth than the average 1970s newsstand comic. And when I say the best is yet to come, I ain't kidding, folks, because target number 3, well, that's one of my all-time favorite comics, and we'll be taking a look at that in the next season. I'm Jason Mink. I'd like to thank you for joining us on this wild ride. It's been great talking old comics with you every Sunday, and I hope you come back when we do, around the end of August. In the meantime, there'll still be lots of great video content on the network, so please stick around. I hope you have a great summer, and I'll see you next time at breakfast.